Ladies and gentlemen, as previously stated in the conclusion of the previous learning unit, we will now dive right into learning unit 3, which is transport policy and regulation in South Africa. Needless to say my name at this point, so let's get right into the business of the day. Learning unit 3 is broken into 3 themes, namely transport policy, transport regulations, key regulations in South Africa, respectively. Theme 1 learning objectives. For Theme 1, the learning objectives will be as follows. Define transport policy, explain why it is important to a country, discuss the major trends to be considered when thinking about transport policy, explain key policy instruments at the disposal of government when setting policies. While we have covered what the learning objectives are, let's now define in simple terms what is a transport policy. Transport policy can be described as that which deals with the development of a framework established to achieve particular objectives relating to social, economic, and environmental development. Further to that, the policy looks to the functioning and performance of the transport system. The importance of the policy is to ensure safety, efficient allocation of resources, as well as the attempt to prevent monopolies. The policy aims to impact both private and public sector. The transport policy's main goal includes effective and efficient decisions in relation to resource allocation in both sectors, public and private, as well as manage and regulate the transport activities. Trends affecting the policy. There are various trends affecting the transport policy. We will now look to define each of them. Discussed in this learning unit are just 4, namely globalization, deregulation and privatization, broader focus of policies, increasing importance of social and political issues. Let's look at globalization. This trend refers to increased exposure to different countries for both freight and passenger transport, and require dealing with numerous different transport policies and regulations. Let's look at deregulation and privatization. This has, on the other hand, resulted in a surge of new private companies running their own private transport networks. This is more evident in the airline industry. A broader focus of policies. This trend speaks to the improvement in the coordination of investments and increased focus on multimodalism and intermodalism. I know you are probably wondering what on earth these terms mean. We will shortly explain the difference between these two. The last but not least trend is the trend increasing importance of social and political issues. Previously, the provision of transport spoke to the technical and engineering issues. That has since changed, as now the social and political issues are largely considered. That is what this trend speaks to. Intermodalism refers to moving of goods from one point to the point of destination by several modes, with each being an independent contractor. This basically means many couriers to fulfill a single trip or journey. Ultimately, multimodalism is similar to the prior. The only difference is that there is a single independent contractor, meaning a single trip or journey is contracted to a single courier. Now we look at policy instruments. Having looked at the trends, the difference between the two modalisms, let us now look at the 6 key policy instruments, namely public ownership. This refers to the full ownership and control of transport infrastructure such as roads, ports, etc. by the government. The second one is subsidies. This is done by the government in an attempt to meet the private sector halfway due to the high costs in investments. This is done to incentivize the private sector and boost investment. The third one is regulatory control. This is the setting up of public agencies that influence an industry, for example, the Civil Aviation Authority. The last one is research and development. The government's involvement in this policy instrument is to promote research into new and better technology which are important to the industries. Labor laws. These have an influence on the functioning of the transport industry. Example, minimum wage laws, maximum number of hours truck drivers should drive or work, etc. Safety and operating standards. The standards include cars that are worthy of being on the road, having passed the roadworthy test. Further to that is speed limits, which can influence the number of deliveries the truck drivers make in a day. Now we look at key policy documents in South Africa. There are many policy documents in South Africa in relation to transport. However, the following 5 are the most important. The National Development Plan 2030, Road to Rail Strategy, Road Freight Strategy, Private Sector Participation Framework Plan, which is currently being developed, Transnet Market Demand Strategy. Now we look at Theme 2. As we get into Theme 2, which is relatively short, the objectives for this theme are as follows. Define transport regulation and explain why it is important to a country. Transport regulation. Transport regulation speaks to the operation of the transport system, for example, speed limits, permits, etc., and that the focus is not just on profits. As competition may be rife during low demand times, transport regulation plays an important role in ensuring that transport system is negatively affected such that it fails to meet demand. Most of the transport regulations take place at a public government level, as overseen by the Department of Transport. Overview of key transport regulations in South Africa. For the following important legislation acts which relate to transport, please refer to the study guide for in-depth reading. Transport Laws and Related Matters Amendment Act 2013, National Land Transport Act 2009, National Road Traffic Management Act 2008, and Cross-Border Transport Amendment Act 2008, Civil Aviation Act 2009, Road Accident Fund Amendment Act 2005. As I had previously stated that Theme 2 is fairly short, we are now left with just Theme 3 of this learning unit, in which we will discuss key transport regulations in South Africa. Key transport regulation in South Africa with respect to modes. As we have seen the different agencies working with the Department of Transport, let us now dive into transport regulations in South Africa with respect to modes. The first one is road. Government has the sole responsibility for the development of road infrastructure through an agency known as the South African National Roads Agency Limited, abbreviated as SANRAL. The second one is ports. In this mode of transport, the National Port Authority is responsible for the development and maintenance of port infrastructure, while South African Port Operations has the sole responsibility of cargo movement and port operations. The South African Maritime Safety Authority focuses on seaside regulations. The next one is rail. Transnet, being the dominant player in this mode of transport, develops the rail policy. Transnet also provides and maintains infrastructure, conducts economic and safety regulations, as well as the responsibility for freight transport operations. The next one is aviation. In this mode of transport, the Airports Company of South Africa is responsible for the developing and maintaining of aviation infrastructure. Ultimately, the South African Civil Aviation Authority is responsible for safety regulation. The functions of the public versus the private sector in regulation. First up, we look at the public sector, which regulates the freight transport system to ensure economic efficiency as well as promote better physical and operational integration of seaports, airports, and land transport networks. Lastly, the public sector must ensure appropriate safety conditions and transport activities. The private sector, on the other hand, has as one of its functions in regulation being to provide superstructure and operations investment. Further to that, the public sector must promote operational integration and efficiency, which will ensure economic growth and development. The private sector, either from a debt or equity perspective, invest and promote investment in infrastructure. That's it for today's video on transport regulation in South Africa. We hope that the content shared here today was helpful and informative. Thank you for joining us. We will see you in the next video.